If you don't answer this phone in 3 seconds, Ethan, this entire port is going to lock down, and I will personally see to it that you go to federal prison." That was Julian Cross, my VP, screaming at me. I hung up, took a sip of my coffee, and watched the Seattle rain hit my deck. My training in the Army Signal Corps taught me one thing: never leave a single point of failure in your communication lines, unless you own the keys to it. In the military, we call it maintaining command and control. In the corporate world, they call it tech debt. I had spent 8 years at Apex Logistics Solutions, a major maritime and port shipping operator based in Seattle, Washington. For 8 long years, my title was Lead Systems Architect, but in reality, I was the only thing standing between a multi-million-dollar logistics company and complete operational paralysis. Apex Logistics Solutions was a company built on a foundation of absolute chaos. At the core of our operations was an ancient IBM AS400 mainframe running an old DB2 database. This green-screen dinosaur, sitting in a climate-controlled room on the 4th floor of our waterfront headquarters, managed everything. It processed shipping manifests, generated bills of lading, assigned shipping containers to crane operators, and tracked customs clearance for hundreds of freighters arriving from Asia. It was a solid machine, but it was built in the early 1990s and spoke a language that modern cloud systems couldn't understand. That's where I came in. When I joined the company after leaving the military, Apex was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in manual data entry errors. The dispatchers had to copy container IDs from the web browser and manually type them into the green screens of the AS400. To solve this, I spent 2 years developing a proprietary Python and REST middleware called Nexus Router. It was a masterpiece of systems integration. Nexus Router acted as a bridge, translating modern API calls from our cloud web apps into database transactions that the DB2 database could understand in real time. Suddenly, truck drivers could scan a QR code at the port entrance, and the AS400 would instantly assign them a pickup lane and notify the crane operators. Efficiency went up by 400%, but as the system grew, so did the traffic. And with traffic came the technical bottlenecks. The primary issue was the IBM DB2 transaction log. Because of the sheer volume of shipping records we processed daily, the transaction logs would accumulate rapidly. A modern system would handle this with massive automated cloud storage allocation. But the AS400 was limited by its hardware. Unless the transaction logs were manually compacted, archived, and cleared every Friday night, the database would reach its capacity limit. If the database transaction log hit 100% capacity, the AS400 DB2 engine was programmed to execute an automatic safety lockout. It would switch itself into a read-only state to prevent data corruption. Once that happened, no new manifests could be written, no containers could be checked in, and no trucks could be dispatched. It would completely freeze the entire port operation. For years, I had begged Julian Cross, our VP of IT operations, to approve a $15,000 budget for a database memory expansion and an automated maintenance license. $15,000 was pocket change for a logistics company bringing in $50 million a year in revenue. But Julian was a career politician, not an engineer. He was obsessed with cutting operational costs to boost his own annual bonuses. Every time I submitted the purchase order, Julian would reject it. "Make it work with what we have, Ethan," he would say, flashing that polished corporate smile. "We need to run lean. We're an agile organization now. Let's not get bogged down in legacy infrastructure spending." So, instead of a clean automated solution, the responsibility fell on me. Every single Friday night at exactly 11:30 p.m., no matter where I was, I had to log into the servers from my laptop, run a series of manual SQL compaction scripts, clear the transaction caches, and reset the log boundaries. It was a manual patch. If I missed a single Friday, the database would lock up by Saturday morning. But the database logs weren't the only corner Julian was cutting. The entire cloud integration for our shipping notifications and label printing was running on borrowed time. To make the Nexus Router middleware function, we relied heavily on third-party APIs. We used Twilio for sending SMS dispatch alerts to truck drivers, and EasyPost for generating FedEx, DHL, and customs clearance labels. When I first set up the integration during the company's expansion phase, Julian repeatedly rejected the corporate purchase orders for enterprise developer accounts. He claimed the vendor approval process would take months, and we needed the system live immediately. Just set it up on your personal accounts for now, Ethan, Julian had told me. Put your credit card on the billing profile, and we'll reimburse you through your monthly expense reports. It's just a temporary fix until we get corporate billing set up. That temporary fix lasted for 4 years. Every month, I would pay approximately $4,800 out of my own pocket to fund the Twilio and EasyPost API usage. Every month, I would submit a massive, detailed expense report, and the finance department would reimburse me. It was a risky arrangement, but I was loyal to the company, and the previous VP had always ensured my reports were paid on time. Then Julian took over. He was determined to show the board that he could slash the IT budget by 20%. He started auditing every expense report with a magnifying glass. He began questioning the API charges, calling them excessive developer overhead. I explained to him repeatedly that without those APIs, the truck drivers wouldn't know which cargo bays to enter, and the port cranes would sit idle because no shipping labels could be generated. He didn't care. He just saw numbers on a spreadsheet that he wanted to delete. Despite the frustration, I stayed. I stayed because Douglas Caldwell, the CEO and founder, had personally promised me that when the senior director of technology retired, the job would be mine. Douglas was an old-school shipping guy who knew the value of hard work. He had seen me pull all-nighters to keep the ports running during shipping crises. "Keep doing what you're doing, Ethan," Douglas had told me during a chat in the break room. "You're the backbone of this operation. When the time comes, you'll be rewarded." I believed him. I spent the next 2 years documenting every system anomaly, training the junior developers, and preparing the infrastructure for a major cloud migration that would finally phase out the AS400. I worked 60-hour weeks, took late-night support calls from stranded dispatchers at the docks, and spent my weekends patching code. I put the company before my personal life, convinced that my dedication and my military-grade discipline would speak for themselves. But in the corporate world, merit is often a distant second to optics. And Julian Cross was a master of optics. As the retirement of the senior director approached, I noticed a shift in the office dynamics. Julian began bringing his nephew, Tyler Hayes, into our technical planning meetings. Tyler was 29 years old, had a degree in marketing, and had spent his brief career jumping from one buzzword-heavy project manager role to another. He knew nothing about systems architecture, legacy mainframes, or port logistics. But he knew how to create colorful PowerPoint presentations filled with terms like synergy, digital transformation, and AI-driven paradigms. Julian introduced Tyler as the new director of Agile Innovation, a role that didn't exist until Tyler arrived. Julian told me that Tyler would be shadowing me to learn how our back-end infrastructure worked. I was instructed to show him everything, to explain the intricacies of the Nexus router, and to teach him how we managed our integrations. My military training had taught me to recognize a tactical repositioning. I knew exactly what Julian was doing. He was preparing to place his nephew in a position of authority, using my knowledge and my labor as the foundation. I kept my composure, answered Tyler's basic questions, and made sure to document every interaction. I was cautious, but I still held on to the hope that Douglas Caldwell, our CEO, would keep his word. I didn't realize how naive I was being until the annual review meeting arrived. The quarterly review room on the 5th floor was glass-walled, looking out over the gray, rain-slicked cranes of the Port of Seattle. I walked in carrying my leather notebook and a printed copy of my performance metrics for the last year. Our system uptime was 99.98%. Under my watch, shipping volume had doubled. Without a single hour of database downtime, Julian Cross was already sitting at the conference table, typing on his thin laptop. Next to him sat his nephew, Tyler Hayes, wearing a tailored navy blazer and looking like he had just walked out of a startup advertisement. "Ethan, come in, take a seat," Julian said, not looking up from his screen. I sat down across from them. I didn't lay out my metrics. In the Army, you learn to read the room before a briefing even begins. The way Julian was avoiding eye contact and the smug grin on Tyler's face told me everything I needed to know. We have some exciting news for the department. Julian started, closing his laptop with a soft click. As you know, Apex is entering a phase of rapid digital transformation. The board wants us to modernize our workflow, embrace agile paradigms, and position ourselves for a cloud-first future. To lead this charge, we are restructuring the IT division. He paused, adjusting his tie. Starting today, Tyler will be stepping into the role of Senior Director of Technology. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. I didn't blink. I didn't let my expression change. 8 years. 8 years of late nights, emergency port calls, and keeping an ancient IBM mainframe running on pure willpower. I had been promised this job by Douglas Caldwell himself. I see, I said, my voice flat. And where does that leave me? Oh, your role is absolutely vital, Ethan, Julian said quickly, leaning forward. You will remain our lead systems architect. Tyler is going to handle the high-level strategic roadmap, the cultural shift, and the client-facing innovation. But he needs your deep technical expertise. We need you to handle the tactical implementation, run the day-to-day back-end operations, and of course, onboard Tyler on the inner workings of the Nexus router and the AS400. Tyler smiled, leaning back in his chair. Yeah, Ethan, I'm really looking forward to partnering with you. We need to disrupt some of these legacy processes. I've been looking at the architecture, and I think we can leverage some AI-driven automation to phase out those old databases. We need to pivot away from static old-school thinking. I looked at Tyler. He didn't even know what DB2 stood for. He didn't know the difference between a physical server and a virtual machine. He was 29 years old, making a 6-figure salary to read buzzwords off a slide deck, while I was expected to continue doing the heavy lifting under his name. Douglas Caldwell personally told me this role was mine, I said, looking directly at Julian. Julian sighed, a patronizing sound. Douglas is the founder, Ethan. He's semi-retired and looks at the company through a very nostalgic lens. But I run the operational divisions. Business needs change. We need young, dynamic leadership to carry us forward. Tyler has the vision. You have the technical skills. It's a perfect synergy. I'm sure you can see the value in that. I see, I said. Excellent, Julian said, as if the matter was settled. Now let's talk about budget optimization. I have your monthly expense report here. He reached into a folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. It was my monthly submission for the Twilio and EasyPost API expenses. The total was $4,820. Julian slid the paper back across the mahogany table toward me. I'm rejecting this. I looked down at the paper, then back up. Excuse me? Nearly $5,000 a month for communication routing and shipping APIs is simply unacceptable, Julian said, his voice hardening. We are in a cost-cutting cycle. Tyler has done some research, and he believes we can build our own internal notification routing using open-source tools. We shouldn't be paying external vendors for basic SMS alerts and label printing. Julian, those APIs are the core of our dispatch system, I explained, keeping my temper in check. Twilio sends the gate entry codes and bay assignments to 500 truck drivers a day. EasyPost connects directly to FedEx and the customs portal. If we don't pay them, the drivers don't get notifications, and we can't print customs labels. The entire port operation stops. Then you should have migrated them to a free tier structure or optimized the payload sizes. Tyler chimed in, crossing his arms. We're looking at lean infrastructure here. $5,000 a month is just bloated development. The accounts are registered under my name and funded by my personal credit card, I said, ignoring Tyler and focusing on Julian. I set them up 4 years ago because you refused to approve corporate billing. I've been expensing it every month. This isn't company debt, Julian. This is my personal money. If you reject this report, you are telling me that I am personally paying for Apex's shipping logistics. Julian shrugged. Well, Ethan, as a loyal team player, I'm sure you can find a way to resolve this within our new accounting guidelines. Perhaps you can pay the balance this month, and we can look at a partial reimbursement next quarter once we see some optimization reports. But right now, my hands are tied. I cannot sign off on vendor bloat. He leaned back, his eyes cold. Furthermore, going forward, we expect all system credentials and vendor accounts to be migrated under Tyler's name by the end of the week. We need to consolidate corporate ownership. I sat in silence for a moment. In the Army Signal Corps, when your unit is compromised and the command structure orders you to hold a position with no ammunition and no support, you don't argue. You execute a tactical withdrawal. You protect the assets you control. I opened my leather notebook. Tucked inside the back cover was a document I had prepared 3 months ago when Julian first started bringing Tyler into my meetings. It was a formal resignation letter. I took a pen from my pocket, signed the bottom of the page, and slid it across the table. It came to rest right on top of my rejected expense report. "What's this?" Julian asked, frowning. "My immediate resignation," I said. Julian laughed, a sharp, dismissive bark. "Ethan, don't be dramatic. You're emotional because of the promotion. Let's take a breath. If you walk out now, you'll burn your bridge. Who is going to hire a 42-year-old developer who only knows legacy mainframes? The market is tough. You have a mortgage. Let's be smart about this." "Yeah, Ethan," Tyler added, sounding genuinely annoyed now. "We're trying to build a team culture here. Walking out during a transition phase is really unprofessional. Let's pivot this into a win-win conversation." I stood up, closing my notebook. I looked at Julian, then at Tyler. Neither of them understood the machine sitting in the server room down the hall. Neither of them understood that the system didn't run on Synergy. It ran on maintenance. "Washington is an at-will state," I said quietly. "My employment ends now. My company badge is on the desk. Have a productive week." I turned and walked out of the glass room. I didn't look back. I went to my cubicle, packed my personal keyboard, my mug, and my military service plaque into a cardboard box. I walked past the row of silent servers, down the elevator, and out into the Seattle rain. I had $4,800 of unpaid debt on my card, but for the first time in 8 years, I felt completely light. On Tuesday morning, I sat in my home office in West Seattle, looking out at the shipping lanes of the Puget Sound. The cargo ships were lined up, waiting to enter the harbor. Up until yesterday, my code was the digital steering wheel that brought them in. Today, I was just a civilian, but as a civilian, I had to protect my personal financial assets. Julian Cross had rejected my $4,800 expense report, and he had explicitly told me that the company would not sign off on what he called Vander bloat. If I left those accounts active, Apex would continue using my credentials, and the API calls would keep hitting my personal Visa card. I had no intention of funding a multi-million-dollar logistics company's operations. I logged into my personal Twilio portal. I went to the billing settings, removed my credit card, and closed the developer profile. Next, I went to the EasyPost API dashboard. I did the same, deleting my credit card and revoking the API keys associated with my billing account. I didn't access Apex's servers. I didn't write any malicious code, and I didn't delete a single file on their systems. My military background had taught me the legal boundaries of engagement. If I had logged into their servers to delete their software, that would be unauthorized access, a federal crime under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. But removing my personal credit card from my personal third-party accounts? That was basic financial defense. Without my credit card, Twilio and EasyPost instantly suspended the accounts. The API endpoints that the Apex Cloud portal relied on to dispatch trucks and print shipping labels were now dead. Any incoming request from our servers would receive a standard 402 payment required error. Then there was the database. The ancient IBM AS400 mainframe sitting on the 4th floor of the Seattle waterfront office was a beast of habit. It was currently processing about 20,000 transactional queries a day. Because of Julian's refusal to upgrade the memory and transaction log boundaries, those database logs grew like a slow leak. Every Friday night at 11:30 p.m., I had to log in via a secured VPN connection to compact the logs, purge the temporary tables, and reset the database pointers. Now that I was no longer an employee, my VPN access was deactivated by HR anyway. Even if I wanted to run the maintenance script, I didn't have the legal authorization to touch the mainframe. I simply shut down my terminal. Without the weekly compaction, the DB2 database transaction log would reach 100% capacity by Friday night. The DB2 engine would automatically enter read-only safety mode to prevent database corruption. The system would freeze. It was a passive ticking clock. On Wednesday, I met Clara Webb for lunch. Clara was the Director of Finance and Internal Audit at Apex. We met at a quiet cafe near Seattle Center, far away from the waterfront office. Clara was a sharp, no-nonsense auditor who had been with the company for a decade. She knew where every dollar went, and she had been trying to figure out why Julian's IT division was consistently over budget despite his claims of cost-cutting. I placed a thick manila folder on the table between us. "What's this, Ethan?" she asked, taking a sip of her tea. "This is the reality of the IT department," I said. "Inside, you'll find the last 4 years of my expense reports for the Twilio and EasyPost integrations. You'll see that Julian rejected the latest report for $4,800. He told me the company wouldn't pay it, which means they expected me to fund their shipping systems out of my own pocket." Clara opened the folder, her eyebrows furrowing as she looked at the billing receipts. "This is absurd. These APIs are critical infrastructure. Why would he reject this?" "Because he wanted to show a 20% reduction in operational costs on paper," I replied. "But that's not the main reason I wanted to meet you." I reached into the folder and pulled out a second set of documents. These were project approval logs and bank routing sheets I had gathered during my last month while I was supposedly documenting systems for Julian's nephew, Tyler. During the documentation process, Tyler had me look over their project ledger to verify integration endpoints, I explained. I noticed 3 separate payments of $40,000 each, approved by Julian, made to a vendor called Apex Shift Consulting LLC. The description says Agile Transition Services and Infrastructure Modernizing Consulting. Clara sat up straight, her eyes narrowing. "I've seen those invoices. Julian claimed they were for a specialized third-party cloud consultant. What about them?" "I ran a search on the Washington State Corporate Registry," I said, sliding a printout across the table. "Apex Shift Consulting LLC was registered 3 months ago. The registered agent and sole owner is a man named Daniel Vance, who happens to be Tyler Hayes' former college roommate. They went to business school together in Oregon. Daniel Vance doesn't run a consulting firm. He works as a bartender at a craft brewery in Portland. Julian approved $120,000 in corporate funds for a shell company owned by his nephew's roommate." Clara stared at the documents, her face turning pale. "This isn't budget optimization. This is corporate embezzlement." "I have the email chains," I added. "Julian instructing finance to expedite these payments without the standard vendor bidding process, citing operational emergencies. He was funneling company money straight to his nephew's associate while refusing to pay the actual developers and rejecting the $5,000 API bills that kept the shipping docks open." Clara closed the folder, her jaw set. "Ethan, thank you. You have no idea how big this is. I need you to do me one favor. Do not say a word about this to anyone. I need to run a forensic audit on Julian's accounts. And I need the element of surprise when I bring this to Douglas Caldwell and the board of directors. If Julian finds out, he'll try to delete the audit trails." "I'm already out, Clara," I said. "My keys are gone. I have no access, and I have no reason to talk." Friday night arrived. The weather was classic Seattle, cool, misty rain rolling in over the sound. I sat on my back deck, a glass of 12-year-old single malt whiskey in my hand, watching the lights of the container ships glittering in the dark. It was 11:30 p.m. For the past 8 years, this was the exact moment my alarm would go off. I would leave my wife on the couch, open my laptop, and spend 45 minutes typing SQL commands into a terminal, fighting back the tide of log data to keep Apex's system breathing. Tonight, I didn't move. I took a sip of my whiskey, listened to the rain, and watched the clock tick to 11:31. The database transaction logs at the waterfront office were now at 98%. The clock was running out. Saturday morning in Seattle brought a rare break in the clouds, with the sun reflecting off the Puget Sound. I sat on my back porch, holding a mug of black coffee, enjoying the silence. At exactly 7:15 a.m., the silence ended. My phone began to vibrate on the wooden table. It was a text message from Dave, one of our senior port dispatchers at the Seattle terminal. "Ethan, sorry to bother you on the weekend, but the dispatch terminal is throwing a database connection error. It won't let us log in new cargo containers. Did the IT department change the passwords?" I deleted the message. I felt a slight twinge of guilt for Dave, who was just trying to do his job, but I was no longer an employee of Apex Logistics. I had no network access, and I had no legal authority to intervene. At 8:30 a.m., the phone rang. The caller ID showed Tyler Hayes. I declined the call and laid the phone face down. A minute later, a voicemail notification popped up. I played it. Tyler's voice was cracked and frantic, stripped of all the polished corporate confidence he had displayed in the conference room. "Ethan, where are you? The systems are down. The database is throwing in SQL 0901 error. Truck drivers are backing up at the Seattle and Tacoma terminals. The Crane software can't write manifests, and the Dispatch web app is completely frozen. Also, EasyPost is returning billing suspended messages. Did you change something before you left? Call me back immediately. We have cargo ships waiting to unload." I took a sip of my coffee. The SQL 0901 error was the standard IBM DB2 system error code for a transaction log full condition. The database had reached its limit, locked itself into read-only safety mode, and shut down all write processes. It wasn't sabotage, it was physics. The logs had filled up, and nobody had run the weekly compaction script. At 9:15, Julian Cross called. I declined. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with a barrage of text messages from him. "Ethan, this is Julian," the first text read. "The port terminals are at a complete standstill. We have 50 shipping containers blocked. You need to log in and fix this immediately." 2 minutes later, "This is sabotage. I know you did this. You revoked the API keys. You will go to prison for this. If you don't call me back in 10 minutes, I am calling our corporate legal counsel and filing a federal complaint with the FBI under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act." I laughed out loud. My military training in communications security had taught me the legal boundaries of digital operations. I hadn't accessed their network since Monday. I hadn't deleted a single file. I had simply closed my personal accounts because they refused to pay the bills. If a company runs its infrastructure on an employee's personal credit card and then refuses to reimburse him, the employee has every legal right to remove his card. I took screenshots of all Julian's texts, saved the voicemail, and forwarded them to Vincent Finch, my attorney. Vincent was a sharp, aggressive employment lawyer I had retained through my military legal services network. Within an hour, Vincent had drafted a formal response and sent it to Julian's work email and the Apex corporate legal department. The letter was a masterpiece of legal defense. It stated that I had resigned on Monday and that my network access had been deactivated. It pointed out that the Twilio and EasyPost accounts were my personal property, registered in my name, and that I had closed them to prevent unauthorized charges after Julian refused to reimburse my $4,800 expense report. The letter warned Julian that any further allegations of sabotage or threats of criminal prosecution would be met with an immediate defamation lawsuit and demanded the immediate payment of the unpaid expense balance, plus legal interest and attorney fees. By Sunday, the situation at the Port of Seattle had devolved into absolute chaos. The 15 trucks that had backed up on Saturday morning had turned into a line of over 300 semi-trucks, wrapping around the maritime terminal and blocking the major arterial roads near the waterfront. The Seattle Port Authority was furious, threatening Apex Logistics with a $50,000 per hour fine for obstructing commercial traffic. Desperate, Julian had hired an external tech consulting firm from Bellevue, paying them a $10,000 emergency weekend retainer to get the mainframe back online. But the consultants were modern cloud developers. They had never seen an IBM AS400. They didn't know how to navigate the green screens, and they didn't have the source code for the proprietary Nexus router middleware. That code was hosted in my personal private GitHub repository, which Julian had refused to migrate to a corporate account because he didn't want to pay the enterprise licensing fees. After 14 hours of trying, the consultants gave up. They told Julian, "Unless you get Ethan Pierce back, this system is a brick. We don't even know where the API endpoints are pointed, and we can't clear the mainframe logs without risking data corruption." Monday morning, the Apex headquarters was in a state of absolute panic. The shipping lines were down, the port authorities were threatening massive fines, and customers were calling to cancel their contracts. At 10 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Julian or Tyler. The caller ID showed Douglas Caldwell. I answered the phone. "Ethan, it's Douglas. the CEO said, his voice sounding tired and weathered. I'm sitting in my office looking at a line of trucks that stretches all the way to the highway. My shipping lines are paralyzed, and our corporate counsel just showed me a letter from your attorney. He took a deep breath. I know about the promotion, Ethan. I know what Julian did, and I know about the expense reports. I should have been paying closer attention. I want you to come to the waterfront office on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. I've scheduled a closed-door meeting in the executive boardroom. Clara Webb from finance will be there. Julian Cross and Tyler Hayes are barred from the floor. Just you, me, and Clara. Let's resolve this. I will be there, Douglas, I replied, my voice calm and disciplined. But my attorney, Vincent Finch, will be sitting next to me. Bring him, Douglas said. Just get here. We need to talk. I hung up the phone, took a deep breath of the fresh Seattle air, and smiled. The battlefield was set, and for the first time, I had all the high ground assets. On Wednesday morning at 9 a.m., the Seattle rain had cleared, leaving a clean, crisp blue sky over the waterfront. I walked into the Apex Logistics headquarters, carrying a slim leather folder. Sitting next to me was Vincent Finch, my attorney, looking sharp in a dark charcoal suit. We were escorted directly to the executive boardroom on the 6th floor. Douglas Caldwell, our CEO, was sitting at the head of the table. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His face was weathered, and he was staring at a stack of logistics printouts. Next to him sat Clara Webb, holding a thick black audit binder. Ethan, thank you for coming, Douglas said, standing up and shaking my hand. He acknowledged Vincent with a nod. Please sit. As we sat down, Douglas leaned back, rubbing his eyes. I'm going to start by apologizing, Ethan. I built this company on trust, but I got too far away from the day-to-day operations. I trusted Julian to manage the IT division, and I didn't realize how much of this company's weight was resting solely on your shoulders. What happened with your promotion and the way you were treated was unacceptable. Clara tapped the audit binder in front of her. Over the last 48 hours, I ran a full forensic audit on the IT operational budget. The invoices to Apex Shift Consulting LLC were completely fraudulent. We tracked the bank routing numbers. The $120,000 was funneled directly into a joint account accessed by Tyler Hayes and his associate. On top of that, we uncovered another $80,000 in inflated travel receipts and unauthorized hardware purchases approved by Julian over the last 2 years. Where are Julian and Tyler now? I asked. Douglas's jaw tightened. I confronted them yesterday afternoon with corporate counsel and our security team. Tyler broke down within 5 minutes. He admitted he didn't know the first thing about the systems, and that Julian had orchestrated the consulting shell company to embezzle the IT budget before the annual audit. I terminated both of them for cause immediately. We have filed a formal criminal complaint for grand larceny, embezzlement, and commercial fraud. They are currently being interviewed by the Seattle Police Department. He took a deep breath, looking directly at me, which brings us to the future of Apex. Ethan, I want to make this right. I am offering you the Senior Director of Technology position. It comes with a $200,000 base salary, a $50,000 signing bonus, corporate equity options, and a direct reporting line to me. You will have full authority to hire your own team, automate the infrastructure, and phase out the legacy mainframes on your own timeline. We need you. I looked at Vincent, then back at Douglas. If this had happened a month ago, I would have accepted it instantly. It was the job I had worked for, the reward I had been promised. But the last 9 days had changed my perspective. I had spent a week waking up at 7 a.m. without an alarm, drinking coffee on my deck, and spending time with my wife without a phone vibrating in my pocket. I had tasted freedom, and my military training had taught me never to return to a battleground that was fundamentally unstable. The corporate culture at Apex was still broken. Douglas was just patching the leak. I appreciate the offer, Douglas, I said, keeping my voice calm and steady, but I will not be returning as an employee. Douglas blinked, genuinely shocked. Ethan, the terminals are still frozen. The external consultants we hired don't know how to clean the AS400 logs, and the truck lines are blocking the state highway. We are losing over $100,000 a day in delayed cargo and port fines. If you don't come back, we're in serious trouble. Vincent Finch quietly opened his briefcase, pulled out a 3-page document, and slid it across the table to Douglas. "I won't come back as an employee," I explained, "but I will act as an independent consultant to resolve the crisis and migrate your infrastructure." Douglas picked up the document, his eyes scanning the pages. "These are my terms," I said. "First, an upfront consulting retainer of $150,000. This covers 30 days of transition work. During this time, I will migrate the Twilio and EasyPost API integrations to corporate-owned accounts, train your senior developers on the middleware routing, and document the automated maintenance procedures for the AS400. My hours are strictly 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Any support calls outside of those hours will be billed at an additional rate of $250 per hour." Douglas looked up, his mouth slightly open. "Second," I continued, "Apex will fully reimburse my outstanding $4,820 expense report with interest and pay all of Vincent's legal fees for this negotiation. Third, Douglas, you will sign a full release of liability, confirming that I did not sabotage your systems, and you will personally sign a letter of recommendation detailing my 8 years of exemplary service." Douglas looked at Clara. Clara didn't say a word. She just gave a slow, pragmatic nod. She knew the math. $150,000 was less than 2 days of port obstruction fines. They had no leverage. They had no other options. Douglas reached into his jacket, pulled out his pen, and signed the bottom of the contract. He slid the papers back to Vincent. "We'll wire the retainer and the expense reimbursement to your account immediately, Ethan," Douglas said, his voice quiet. "When can you get the terminals running?" "The moment the wire confirmation hits Vincent's escrow account, I will log in," I replied. "Clearing the DB2 transaction logs takes exactly 30 seconds. Once that's done, your trucks can start loading again." At 11:15 a.m., Vincent's phone buzzed with the wire confirmation. I opened my personal laptop connected to the guest Wi-Fi, opened a secure terminal, and ran the DB2 log compaction command. 30 seconds later, the green screen mainframe on the 4th floor reset its transaction boundaries. Down at the docks, the shipping terminals flashed green, the crane operators received their container manifests, and the 3-mile-long truck line began to move. I closed my laptop, stood up, and shook Douglas's hand. "I'll see your development team tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Douglas," I said. I walked out of the Apex building and stepped into the warm Seattle sunshine. I had my money, my clean record, my attorney fees covered, and a contract that paid me more in 1 month than I used to make in a year. In the military, we call it a successful tactical withdrawal. In the corporate world, they call it sweet revenge.